Good morning, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News. Today is Friday. It's the 14th day of February, 2025. And as we end another turbulent week in Israel, we again find ourselves at the proverbial crossroads. A number of important questions need to be answered. Now, the first one is this. Well, it seems that Hamas will release hostages tomorrow, but only three. They have provided the names of the three men who will be set free. But here's the question. Why will Israel settle for only three to be released after initially insisting that Hamas must release all of the remaining hostages, or at least nine that are set to be released during the first phase? And if not, the fighting will continue. We will, ramp up the fighting to a way you've never seen before, unless you do what we say. Well, what has Hamas done? First of all, as we're going to see, they've broken the ceasefire agreement by threatening to delay the release of the hostages. And Israel says, well, okay, you do that. We demand that you release all of the hostages, or at least the nine during the first phase. And Hamas says, okay, we're going to keep the deal. We're going to release three of them. And Israel capitulates. Israel's looking very, very weak here. It's sad. So here's another question, though. Why don't the Arab states, this is from Marco Rubio, something we've asked, why don't the Arab states take in these Palestinians that they insist they care about? Where's their plan to help them out? They never have helped these people. In fact, we're going to see just the opposite. They've actually removed Palestinians from their own land. They don't want them either. And so, great question here. Next question is, what will Israel do with those Palestinian prisoners who have been released, who are murderers, who will be forming militias to further attack Israel in the future? This is one of the things that very few people are talking about, but we've got an article that deals with this because what these murderers do, they've been released from prison. They were there for life for killing Israelis, and they're going to form militias to again attack Israel from both Gaza and Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, because that's what they do. That's who they are. So Israel has to prepare for that. In other words, they're just keeping the cycle of violence going. And then the most important question, this is one we have talked about in the past. I think we can't mention this enough because this puts the situation in proper context. Why is it allowed for Israelis and Jews to be resettled out of their land? In other words, why is it okay for the Jews to be moved out of their land, but not the Palestinians, at least not the Palestinians that the Jews want to remove? Because as we're going to see, Arabs have removed Palestinians from their own land. They've had no problem doing that, but they say it's immoral when Israel goes about to do it. So we're going to look at all these. All right, let's look at the headlines. Number one, Israel says they're readying for three hostages to be freed on Saturday and still pushing for more. Hamas has named the three hostages that will be released tomorrow, and Netanyahu meets the defense brass to report. As report indicates, the bid to pressure Hamas into expediting the releases of six others in the first stage. And an Arab diplomat says, don't get your hopes up. Of course not. They're not going to do that. They've never done anything to help you. Hamas said today, on Friday, it would release three Israeli hostages as planned. Tomorrow, they gave the names of these hostages, and they backed off of a threat to delay the next release of captives after accusing Israel of failing to meet its obligations. A false, accusation, by the way. And so they said, "No, okay, we'll go through with it." Israel was reported to be pushing for further live hostages to be released in the upcoming days, but a senior Arab official told the Times of Israel that it's unlikely that Hamas would deviate from the original time frame of the agreement. Isn't that interesting? They already had deviated from the original time frame Monday this week when they said we're not going to release these ones on time. We're going to delay it. And so after getting threatened by Israel, they just said, okay, we'll keep the hostage deal going. And yet, this shows how weak Israel looks. The week started with Hamas declaring that the hostage release would be put on hold, breaking the agreement with Israel. Now they insist that both sides must keep the original deal after they broke it, yet they pay no price for breaking it themselves, and all the bluster in Israel. We heard stories that, the day after Trump made this statement. If it were up to me, I'd say release all the hostages on Saturday, or you'll have hell to pay. War will take place. And he gave Israel the green light. Some of the Israelis said that's what we're going to do. We're going to insist every hostage be released this Saturday. Then they backed off and they said, no, now we'll insist that nine of the remaining hostages in the first phase must all be released on Saturday, or else we will fight. We will go to war, and will go more intensely than ever before. And Hamas says, okay, let's keep the original deal. We're going to release only three of them. And Israel says, oh, fine. So they capitulate again. Israel looks very weak. Hamas continues to control the narrative, control the show. So it's interesting to see. And this has not been lost on a lot of Israelis. You make these comments, make these threats, but then you back off from them. All right, headline number two. Marco Rubio asked a great question, Secretary of State. He said Arab states must present Gaza plan if they reject Trump's proposal. Secretary of State says the U.S. is open to hearing new proposal from Arab nations regarding Gaza. All these countries say how much they care about the Palestinians, but none of them want to take in any Palestinians. And that's very clear and very correct what Rubio said. Now, as we will see, this has been historically true. In the meantime, though, the release of these murderers from the Israeli prisons continue to compound the problem, which brings us to our third headline. Released terrorists will build militias in Judea and Samaria. There's a brigadier general retired named Amir Avivi, and he said the release of thousands of murderous terrorists is a huge problem that Israel will have to deal with. Basically, he said it's complex and dangerous. He is the founder and chairman of the Israel Defense and Security Forum. And basically, he said this huge problem needs to be dealt with. And once this hostage deal is over, it will require significant military pressure on the terror infrastructure in both Judea, Samaria, as well as in Gaza. Now, here's the point that he's making. It's well taken. You've been exchanging murderers for innocent hostages, and you're setting the stage for more terrorist activity in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, just like you saw on October 7th, 2023, as these groups strengthen their resolve and they get, why not? All we have to do is take hostages, and for every hostage we take, we get 10 murderers released, maybe 15 people serving life sentences for murdering Israelis. We'll just put them back in. So we'll just keep doing this, and Israel keeps capitulating, and it's seemingly a never-ending problem. And so this is something that after all this has gone on, all this has been settled, you've still got the problem of these murders there in Judea and Samaria and other parts of the Middle East. Their lives are all set for one thing, and that's destroying the nation of Israel. So where's the leadership in all this? Now, what we're going to emphasize here, our fourth headline, it's really an excellent article from the Gatestone Institute. It's put the entire issue into historical perspective, and we're going to talk about how this relates to last days Bible prophecy. It's from a man named Daniel Greenfield, and the title is Resettling Gaza. Is it the right thing to do, and can it work? Yes, it can, he says. And here's the summation of it. Many, if not most, peace plans propose the further resettlement of hundreds of thousands of Jews living in Judea and Samaria to make a way for a, quote, Palestinian state. Even as they object to resettling Gazan Muslims in Arab countries, they refer to Jews living in the West Bank as settlers, refer to their communities as settlements, and propose that they be resettled elsewhere. The same people who insist that it's morally wrong and impractical to resettle 2 million Muslims out of Gaza also argue it's morally right and practical to resettle nearly 500,000 Jews. Despite being told it was impossible, Israel did evacuate hundreds of thousands of Gazans to make way for military operations. During the beginning of the war, around 1 million Gazans left the north for the south of the Gaza Strip, and the UN would later claim as many as 1.5 million Muslim settlers in Gaza had been displaced. The resettlement of large numbers of Palestinians has happened before in the Middle East. Okay, this is important to note. While the resettlement of Gaza would take place on a larger scale, it would not be that much larger than the resettlements during the war or in the aftermath of the Gulf War. The objections to it, that is the resettlements, are both moral and practical, but they're groundless, the article goes on to say. Resettlement is feasible and moral. If the Kuwaitis and the Jordanians could resettle the Palestinians out of their countries on far less ground than the atrocities October 7th, the Israelis certainly have the right to do it. This is an important point. Both Kuwait and Jordan basically resettled Palestinians living in their countries. Nobody made a squawk about that, not because they were murdering Jordanians or Kuwaitis or did anything near what Hamas did to Israel. And yet that was fine to resettle them, but Israel can't do the same thing. The article goes on to say, The PLO and Hamas use terrorism at every turn to press for more Israeli concessions while giving nothing in return. Their leaders have said again and again they intend to destroy Israel, and that's never ceased. They continue to destroy Israel. And October 7th, after October 7th, everyone is finally taking them at their word. Now, this was a great article. And again, Gatestone Institute is the website. Daniel Greenfield's the man's name about resettling Gaza. It's really excellent. It goes into great detail about the history, the past, where this has taken place before, where the Arabs have resettled Palestinians out of their own countries, and tens of thousands of them, and no one squawked about that at all, just because they could and they wanted to, get rid of the problem, but not because of any murderers, not because of any terrorist activity like what's happened to Israel. And yet they're fine to do that, but Israel is not. So again, Israel wants to resettle a population that lives on their border that has attacked them, murdered over 1,100 people in one day, and has for 15 months continued to attack them. That's people from Gaza, Hamas. It's supposedly immoral for them to want to remove Gazans from their border. Yet it was okay in the past when the Palestinians were removed from different parts of Arab countries in the Middle East. Now, Israel continues to be portrayed in all of this as the aggressor, and the people of Gaza, led by Hamas, as the victims. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, here's the only way we can understand this. That's why we always go back to the Bible for the answers to this. It makes sense from the testimony of Scripture. In our book, 25 Signs, we're near the end. Sign number 7 says there will be a continual search for peace in Israel, and we explain it as follows. There will eventually be a peace treaty, a covenant, which seemed to be a peace treaty between Israel and the final Antichrist, the coming man of sin. And that treaty, actually, that agreement sets off the final 7-year period the clock starts ticking, leading to the return of Jesus Christ to the earth. Now, here's the point we make. And again, we encourage you to not only download and read this book, but particularly sign number 7, because here's what we say. For this to happen, in other words, this peace treaty, there must be a dire need for peace in the region. In other words, why it's such a big deal is because that there hasn't been peace in the region. This is precisely what we have seen since the modern state of Israel was reborn in 1948. The continual lack of lasting peace will eventually cause this treaty to be made. Furthermore, it will give Israel this false hope that they have finally achieved the peace with their neighbors. Instead, this treaty will start the countdown of the Great Tribulation period, culminating in the return of Christ to the earth. Consequently, this sign, the continual search for peace, is of the utmost importance. In other words, the fact is that they have to continually search for peace, meaning it eludes them, but there'll come a day when someone will come on the scene and have this great peace treaty, a great agreement, and Israel will buy into it, and they'll seemingly think they finally got peace in the region. Now, so much is happening right now, but thankfully, like we said, the Bible's told us ahead of time what's going to happen, and we will not be surprised when these events do take place. So to understand what Scripture says, please take advantage of the free resources on our website, Educating Our World, found under the heading of Bible Prophecies. We explain this in great detail. So this is happening just as we expect. Israel continually searches for peace. They're not getting it. The hypocrisy of the Arab world, not taking in the Palestinian people, saying you can't move them from your border. It's immoral, even though they're attacking them from their borders, or these other Arab countries have moved Palestinians out of their country. In the tens of thousands, they had no problem doing that. And in the past, they've also moved, Israelis out of their countries. Jews and Israelis have been moved out of their country, not for any other reason except they don't want them, not because they caused any type of riots or problem or murders. So as we see it, watching this only makes logical sense if we look at Scripture, because it does say it's not rational, it's not logical from any other perspective. Why the Jews? Why did they get blamed for everything? Why is it their fault? Well, again, it's a spiritual problem, a spiritual issue, and that's what we keep emphasizing here on Breaking News. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching, and as always, until next time, may the Lord richly, richly bless.